If you haven't heard about Anchor, it's the easiest way to make a podcast. Literally, you guys. So let me explain. First, it's free. I am not joking, you guys. It is totally free. 2, there's creation tools that allows you to record and edit your podcast right from your phone or even your computer. 3, Anchor will distribute your podcast for you so it can be heard on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, and many more platforms. 4, you can also make money from your podcast with no minimum listenership. Now, is that cool or what? And finally, it's everything you need to make a podcast in one place, you guys. So, I have 2 other podcasts with Anchor, and I absolutely love working with them so much. So, why don't you download the free Anchor app today or go to anchor.fm to get started. What's up, you guys, and welcome to the official podcast of Education Thoughts with Damian Anderson. So listen up. This is an education podcast where I will give you 100% real, honest, and authentic truth in every single episode. From what's happening in the educational world to interviewing guests and sharing life stories relating to education. I got you covered. So join me on this journey of exploring the education life together with me. Welcome everyone to another episode of Education Thoughts with Damian Anderson. I am Damian Anderson here, and today I have another special guest, another great person here with me. He is a committed teacher leader, a community and youth activist, a social and human rights activist, a public speaker, and a historian. So I would like for y'all to welcome Devin Evans.
All right. Thank you, Damon, for that introduction. Thank you, everyone who's listening. It's just a pleasure to be on your podcast. Again, my name is Devin Evans. I am in Chicago, Illinois. This is my 5th year in the classroom, and I teach currently 10th grade language arts. I'll be moving to a new grade level, most likely in the fall, going to 12th grade, and I'm creating a class called American Studies, a mixture between ELA and also history, social sciences. In my current school building, I work for no one of charter schools. I am a 10th grade team lead. This is my teacher responsibilities, and so I've been doing that job for about 2 years now. And I'm excited to be here today. Thanks a lot.
Right. So I want to ask you this. What kind of like inspired you to teach in the first place?
Okay, that's a good question. Well, I think that inspiration normally comes from something within or without. So I'm gonna start with the within perspective. And so when I was a little younger, around 3rd or 4th grade, I used to always take like chalk from my school. I took my mom's teddy bears from her closet and taught them on our stairs in our house. So for some reason, I was a little kid, I've always had a desire to want to educate others and teach. I couldn't explain necessarily where that came from, but all my teachers in elementary school, Miss Murray, Mr. Sin, Mr. Colston, all played a very important part in me watching them closely and wanting to emulate that as a kid. So I would definitely say my inspiration began from me watching my teachers teach and then me doing the same exact thing. As I got a little bit older, around my sophomore year in high school, major education came a little more clear to me. I've always knew I wanted to be a teacher, but it got more clear when I got to high school that I wanted to make it a career. And so I got to Michigan State University and decided to major in that. And it's been approximately 6 years so far in the classroom. So inspiration came from, I think, a young age from other teachers that taught me when I was a kid.
Right, that's nice there. So what is like your best tip for trying to make this world like a better place for our students to live in?
Well, I would say that there is, it's kind of difficult to tackle at a local level global issues, unless you are at a global scale as far as an organization and the nations, or there's a government in place to do global issues. So our kids are in a global world, but I like to focus more so on a bottom up kind of progression of activism, or how to fix the world or change the world. You start locally. First of all, you start with yourself, number one. It should be internal, yourself first. And so in my classroom and content, I have units where we talk about identity and stuff like that. So that's the first step for changing anybody, is yourself. And then once that part is mastered, or you have foundational work to continue to grow, the second part is your local, your school, your local neighborhood, where you live at, the city, then national, and then global. So I think what I will say for people or anybody else that's trying to change the globe, start with yourself first and kind of work your way up. It's very difficult to make a big, large scale in the world and make it a better place for everyone if you're not on the global scale. Unless you're the president of the United States, you're making law and policy, you're involved in global organizations, it's difficult to change the world for everyone. So I like to start to focus on the self and the local areas first, and then progress upward.
Okay. So my next question to you is, since we're all stuck at home now, what has been like the most important thing that you have learned about yourself, either becoming a teacher or since like during this time, this quarantine time?
Well, one thing I realized myself is that transitioning so quickly to remote learning is a challenge. I'm not necessarily tech savvy as far as an expert, but I am able to learn pretty quickly and learn how to access and use technology or applications or et cetera. So I realized that that's taking a little bit longer than I thought. There's some applications that I'm using, for example, Google Classroom, that it requires a little bit of training to know how to use those functionalities. For example, when you upload an assignment in Google Classroom, if it's not an original document made in Google Classroom, it's hard for that file to like be seen or used by the students in your class. So I'm having an issue with me uploading my documents I've already made into that space, and kids not being able to have their own copy to do work on. So that's what I know that, and so I had to learn that the hard way. That's it's a way to make the document in the actual Google Classroom. So that little hurdle of going from paper copies and for the most part in my classroom and oration to all online has been a little bit difficult. So I've learned that I do have the ability to adjust and the ability to do what needs to be done for my kids to learn. So I'm proud of myself for that, because it's not an easy task.
It's not. I know teachers, like they are just trying to do their best with trying to how to stay connected with their students during this time, and it's just I just absolutely just they just work so hard. I just thank them for doing so much during this time for their students. So I want to ask you this: if you could do anything to improve our education system, what would you do about it? How would you fix it up better, possibly?
Good question. So once again, even like with the question about the how to make the world a better place, even education, there are a lot of layers to education. There is a local level, national level, and there is a global level. It's all kind of layers to how to make it better. And so again, I will go back to what I originally said, that I will start at the spaces where I can make an impact. Let's start with local level issues in education. So in Chicago, I'm working for an organization. We're not working for, but I co-founded an organization called the Black Male Educator Alliance of Illinois, and it supports the recruitment, retention, and the attainment of Black male teachers. So one issue I want to fix locally and also nationally too, because other folks are doing this work, is to help increase the number of qualified Black male educators in the classroom for all students, because studies show, and we all know, that had a Black teacher that was very qualified and effective, that having that Black teacher does play a very important role in your success academically. So I will work more so with Chicago Public Schools and other people in Chicago to ensure that we are getting qualified Black male teachers in the classroom, because we are only 2%, and that isn't enough.
Exactly. I talk about that. Me and my co-host talk about that on my podcast Future Educators Talk, and it's just that 2%. It's ridiculous to us. We need to raise that up. So because we need more Black educators um, to teach our students. That's what I feel. So why do you think education is like so important to you and probably to others as well? Why do you think that?
Well, education, whether it's done in a formal setting, in the school building, or college setting, or in your household with your parents and guardians or your community, education has layers. It's not just the classroom building. That is one aspect of how kids should be learning. In a classroom building, for example, you have those content areas, language arts, math, music, and etc. And most people in the world are not skilled in all those areas. So most schools try to give kids a liberal arts education where they are getting a chance to learn or have mastery or familiarity with different content areas. That cannot happen in certain spaces like in your community or maybe even in your household if folks don't know the content. So having a formal school is meant to help bridge that gap to give kids a chance to learn content by experts who know their content and to teach them the skills they need for success. When I say success, that means that education is needed to fix, to strategize, to theorize, and put into practice all those things you learn, whether it's in your formal setting, as far as your content area, with your family background, they teach you there at home, your community setting, church, etc. All those ways of educating is meant to make a more, well, the goal is a more stable world. The idea is that you're more educated, the more you know, you should be able to make better decisions. That isn't always the case. Sometimes you get educated and your viewpoints might get cynical. They might get selfish. So it's very difficult to kind of figure out where it's going to go as far as education is concerned. But there's some folks who are very, very smart that have viewpoints that may be considered by others to be cruel or mean or not necessarily correct, like capitalism. That's a theory that people have made up in their mind and you choose to practice. Even so, communism or etc. And you might be smart, but you have different beliefs in your smartness or your education that causes friction in the globe. So even when it comes to making the globe better, education can be done in so many different ways that it can create friction. So I think to kind of close it all up, I think the purpose of education is to try the best you can to learn, I think, all perspectives and try to make the best possible theories, the best possible ideals and things in practice that can help us as a global community work together and thrive as a human race.
I love that right there. So my next question to you, I want to ask, like, what has been your biggest failure in possibly this year or last year, and why do you think that had happened to you?
That's a very good question. So there are a lot of failures. You got big and small. And again, failure is relative to how a person perceives it. I like failures as lessons. I learned a lot from things not going too well for our classroom content or et cetera. But I will say that one big challenge or failure, I guess you want to put in that kind of terminology, is that in education, as I just said previously in my comments, you're going to have friction. You're going to have adults who are in leadership who have their own perspective regarding what's best for kids, and you have yours. And when you have that going on, it can create some tension if you're not able to properly come to a compromise. So I think my biggest failure for me this year and just in education, generally speaking, sometimes is the inability to find compromise amongst very compelling and very sometimes true in their own regards ideas. If I am talking to someone and maybe their ideology or perspective is not one in which I necessarily agree with, I don't necessarily compromise as I probably should or figure out a way to come to a medium. When I have certain views about education, I kind of stick to those kind of guns and kind of keep it there, which can sometimes cause a lot of friction in relationships. And so I think that's one of my biggest failures, and I'm working on this year next to kind of make sure that I'm not being so absolute in my ideals, and that I'm open to hear other folks' perspective, because I don't have all the answers.
Yeah. Yeah. And speaking from biggest failure, what about your biggest surprise that you have had in the last few months, and possibly last year, and why you think that had happened to you?
Well, my biggest surprise, and trying to keep it in the educational sense, is that I'll keep it to recently with online learning. It has been difficult to transition to online learning or remote learning, we call it our school, but I am surprised that I'm still teaching at a very high level. On my social media pages, I do post every now and then some pictures and videos of me instructing, and it's pretty high level, great content in my classroom. And when I teach on my online classes, it is the same level of energy. I stand up, I engage kids, even if it's pre-recorded or not. So I'm surprised at myself that despite the pandemic and me always not feeling the best, I've been able to maintain a high level of pedagogy despite the crisis.
So I want to ask you this: how do you continue to learn in order to stay on top of things within your role as a teacher? How do you continue to learn?
Well, as a teacher, you have to constantly change and adjust. I will argue maybe you should always adjust your content and adjust how you teach and your pedagogy as needed for kids. But big overarching changes in your instructional practice takes, for me at least, probably every year or so. I do find a new technique, a new method that I institute in my classroom that I'm going to use. So what I've done, have been involved in numerous professional development opportunities. Currently, I'm enrolled in UPenn's project-based learning program. I'm learning how to institute project-based learning into my classroom. I also I have a graduate degree in language arts. So I've constantly done things in Chicago, a thing called Ed Labs, where you go to it's an organization that supports teachers who want to cover a book. So a couple of years ago, I was a part of Ed Labs. I got this big book packet, or this big set of books for my class to use from the Hate You Give. And we had meetings every other week or so discussing how we cover the content and the book. So there are lots of opportunities in different cities like Chicago to take part in professional development as far as your pedagogy or et cetera. And so what I do to make sure I stay abreast and keep myself fresh is try to find at least every year one professional development or one skill or one something you can institute into your classroom space to keep yourself energized and your space unique. Because most teachers, once you get a point in your career where your classroom stays stagnant and you don't find ways to adjust, you get bored, the kids get bored, and then the level of instruction and teaching goes down. So for me, I just try to find at least one thing, one organization once a year I can be part of to continue my my learning process.
Okay. So I want to talk with you about this. You are an active member of nationally and locally based teaching policy organization called Educators for Excellence. Can you tell my audience about this organization?
Yes, Educators for Excellence, short acronym called E4E. It's a nationally based organization that has affiliates around the country. I don't know all the cities, but Chicago has one, Los Angeles, Connecticut, New York City. And it is a org that has people who work in the organization for policy initiatives. So they gather teachers around each city and they ask them, what do you need? What issues are impacting you and your students? And then we curate a policy platform where we go out to our senators in DC, our local representatives in our own districts in our city, and we advocate for laws to be passed to support us in those endeavors. So literally it takes the work out of having to constantly go to DC or go to your Congress and advocate for certain things. This org solely has folks who are hired in those positions who bring us together for community conversation and policy initiatives, and they go out to different locations and advocate for us. So it's a great organization. And just recently, I went to Washington, D.C., I think it was last year, for a policy initiative on teacher diversity, where I talked to a panel. I spoke to senators there as well. So it's a great place for teachers who may not want to necessarily jump head on into policy, but who do want to make sure their voice is heard. It gives a space for folks like myself to have that voice without having to leave the classroom.
Okay. So I want to leave off with this. I should have asked this at the beginning. How are you doing during this pandemic that we are in? How are you and your family quite doing during this pandemic that we are all in, stuck at home, and just we have to deal with this, our new normal of life?
Right, thanks for asking that. So personally, I'm up and down. There's some days in which I'm doing really well and I'm engaged and doing work and feeling very optimistic. And some days I'm not doing too well. Kind of like depressing to go outside sometimes because, everybody has masks on. That's the reality. Coronavirus is around and where it's at. So kind of nerve-wracking. But I will say this, when you're catching a plane, my friend said this, or a colleague on a conference call last night. He said that when you catch the plane, the flight attendant always says that if there's an emergency, put your own mask on first and then help somebody else. So I realized that I have not done the best job thus far in the quarantine at taking care of myself first. I am teaching, but it's more important, first and foremost, that I take care of myself first before I help anybody else. We've been asked to check in on kids, and I love my kids and I've been checking on them, but I'm like, God dang, has anybody even checked on me to see how I'm doing? So I'm now going to make sure that going forward that I take care of my mental needs first, talking to friends and family, praying, talking to my pastor, and things like that before I even engage in content or engage with anybody else. Because if I, like in an emergency like this, and things are going haywire, everybody being helped out but me, I'm gonna end up dying myself, and that is no use to nobody. So I'm doing okay, but I think going forward after that advice, I'll be doing a lot better.
Yes. And I've been talking about this a lot on my podcast. I'm just like a big advocate for this, that your mental health, it is so very important to take care of yourself, because how are you going to help others and you are not even like taking care of yourself? So I'm just like very big of that. It is so important to take care of yourself. I mean, for me, that is like the top priority. So we all know that schools are closed for the remainder of the school year. What do you think for the future of what's going to happen of next school year? What do you think is going to happen? Are we still going to be, doing this remote learning into the next school year? What do you think is going to happen?
Well, I think first of all, I think that my kids have said this to me numerous times, and I agree with them. The best learning, it takes place in proximity, not through Zoom calls, not through online learning. The best type of learning is all built upon proximity and relationships, especially in urban settings, where the school is a safe place. You get food there, shelter there, and also get education there as well. So to have it taken away from our kids and for families is very difficult, but safety is first. So in the fall, I presume that unless there's a vaccine that's made very quickly, there's going to be probably still remote learning taking place in the fall, and maybe for the foreseeable future. And it's very depressing to think about, but it's just a reality until we get a vaccine or cure. So that's probably going to be the mode. I know there's some people that like the online learning, and there's some schools that have just online learning as where kids go, and they're home, their parents, something like that. But I know that for most kids, especially in the urban setting, that is not the best method to learn. You need to learn in a classroom space. You got to have that conversation with them. It's just so important to have that. And I think it's important to note, far where we're going, technology is definitely here, but I do not like the idea of us solely relying on technology for everything, driving our cars, and eventually one day might have our consciousness on computers one day. That is in the works now. I don't like that. Technology is meant to supplement. It should not be a total absolute. It should help out, not just be the only crutch we use to help educate students and help us live our lives. So I'm hoping that we don't get too far ahead of ourselves and get used to having this space where we learn online solely. That to me is not the best place to go right now or in the future. You have to have a mixture of both in-person learning and online as well.
Yes, I agree with you. Absolutely. So I would like to thank you so much for coming on my podcast, having this discussion. I really appreciate it. So thank you so much for coming on, Devin.
All right, thanks a lot, Damian, and best of luck on your podcast. Look forward to hearing it when it's all ready and done.
All right. Where can people follow Mr. Devin Evans at?
All right, so those are interested. So my profile professionally, if you are, is Twitter. Is at Mr. Debbie Dev. That's MRDVYDEV. That's my Twitter handle. So that's one location there. I have a LinkedIn profile too. LinkedIn.com/ Devin Evans is me in the search bar, and you find me there.
All right. So thank you so much for coming on. So thank you. Y'all can listen to this when this will be available, and I will have it up for you guys. Remember to, before I leave off, to take care of yourself because your mental health is very important, and to please wash your hands.
Okay. Thanks. Bye, Damian. Have a good one.
You too.
Hello, everyone. It's Damian Anderson. If you have a question, concerns about my podcast, Education Thoughts with Damian Anderson, stories to share with me, feedback to make my podcast better, reactions to the things I talk about, jokes to tell, or someone you would like for me to interview, please send them in by direct messaging me directly on Instagram at @DamianAnderson or at EduThoughtsPod. You can email me at DamianAnderson2019@gmail.com or send in a voice message by going to anchor.fm/EduThoughtsPodcast and click on the message tab to where you can record your questions into me. Thanks.